if it's a time.
Okay. All right, I think we are live now. So welcome everybody to the next discussion for the book Checkout Book Club. It's going to be A Song of Blood and Stone by Penelope. This is the first book in her Earthsinger Chronicles series. So I don't know if we want to start off with overall thoughts. I think that's what we've done in the past. Is that what you guys want to start with?
Sure.
Okay.
Maybe what version we read too.
What version we read?
Yeah, for sure. We'll
and maybe actually before that, can maybe someone explain the different versions? Like Maria, I know you put it in the Discord because there are three versions. Is that my understanding?
3 versions, which I discovered when I was looking at my audio and like what version that was. So there was the self-pub one, which was that's the shortest one, the self-published book. And then she came out with, she was picked up by a traditional publisher and came out with a hardcover. And I think the audio is that middle book, which has, I forget how many words in between, but that one is longer. I think it's like 270 pages, like 370, maybe like 100 pages more. And then the like paperback is a special edition paperback that she put even more into. Yeah. And that one's
like 140,000 words,
500 something pages. Yeah, so that's like the really long one.
And there's
the 3 total.
There's different characters, there are different perspectives in the bigger
version. She just kept adding and adding.
But like new
so
characters.
I have no idea which version I read. It was it's an ebook on Scribd, and I just checked. It doesn't like give like a date or anything.
I think
but
that's the self-pubbed one.
You think that's the self-pub one? It's
no,
I think we'll have to go through like which POVs did you
What's
read?
the cover look like? What's the cover look like? Because I think they all have different covers.
On my Scribd,
it was the medium-sized one, the like 400-page one. And
that's
then
the one
I had.
That should be the paperback.
Oh, that's the big one.
That's the really long.
I think that's the long one.
I'm gonna say it feels like the long one.
Are characters Ella and Ben in it?
Yes.
Ella has a perspective. Okay, that's a big one because Ella and Ben don't exist.
There was no Ella and Ben in the book I read.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ella and Ben don't exist.
Knew it.
So did anyone read the really short one?
Yes,
I
read
the short one with the pink cover. Yeah, the 273-page one. That one. Yes. I read the audio, which is the middle book one, but I did compare with this one as I was reading, so I kind of did both.
Kate, which one did you have? Audiobook.
I had the long one. I, of course, didn't bring it up here with me, but I have the long 500 and some.
So you'll have to tell us all about Ella and Ben.
I'm sad actually that she's not in the other versions because she was a major appeal for me in.
They're not even characters in the other book.
They don't exist. No.
It's kind of interesting.
What is this whole storyline then?
It's just Jasmina and Jack's like romance.
Why
Jasmina and Jax, and it's like a hardcore romance book.
I had no idea this was a romance. With the middle book had awkward sex scenes I've ever read in my life.
Like I the middle book just got to the first sex scene.
I
skimmed through it.
So cringy. They're so cringy. I'm so uncomfortable.
The number of times that the word buttocks was written.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Guys, I listened to it on audio.
Okay, they're having sex. I don't care.
But I don't know. Like, it's just so interesting because maybe those scenes were rewritten and like it's hard to know. I don't know.
Yeah, they were pretty. Like
they were really cringy in the full one too.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. I skimmed those sections.
I'll be honest. Like,
we've lost
do this.
We lost the plot a little bit, guys.
Yeah, we did.
A little here. I think we should give our overall impressions.
Yeah, overall opinions first. Kristen, you want to start?
This is the one that I'm most conflicted on, but I think I'm giving it 2.5 stars because I started reading like the big version that you have, Kate, and then I couldn't get into it. So I'm like, I have to do the audio, and the audiobook's obviously different. So I couldn't immersion read it, and I was starting to notice all the differences. Like even simple things about where scenes are placed in the book, she changed. It's very interesting. Yeah, like just the way that even the chapters are different. And I tried to follow that chapter thing she gave us. I didn't really understand what she was trying to say there. I couldn't really make sense of it. But yeah, I had no idea going into this it was a romance. and I was not into the romance. And I think you have to be into the romance to like this, because that's what this is. The world could have been interesting to me, but I was confused. There's technology I wasn't really understanding. The whole thing, I was just very, but the romance just made me uncomfortable. And I don't want to spoil it, but it has one of my least favorite romantic tropes at the end. So I think it's a 2.5, because actually the opening chapter I really liked. Like that prologue, I thought I was going to get something really cool, and I didn't. So that's how I feel.
Hot takes.
Is that your lowest grade
It's my
you've ever
lowest.
given for
In
this
a book club.
It's
Yes.
my second highest. Interesting.
I can't figure out our reading taste. I just.
So this is so I haven't. So I'm assuming I'm next.
Yeah.
I have not finished
make
it.
your
I'm like
confessions,
at the 50% mark of apparently the longest version.
Will you finish it?
No, okay. So what I told myself was that I was going to see how far I could skim tonight before going to bed to see like how much I can like actually get through, like just by skimming, and then that's probably going to be it. And I really dragged my heels even to start this one. There was like just something in the synopsis about her having like she's the only one with the power to save them, and she's like hated by everyone. I'm like, this is a trope that I am currently not into, like hard not into. So I kept dragging my feet even to start it. So I like went into it being like, ugh, and I feel like I just like set myself up to not enjoy this. And up to this point, I'm surprised that you guys are calling this like a hard, like super romance, because I feel like I guess I just don't care about about the romance, so that maybe I'm not like paying attention to those scenes where I'm like, okay, I get it. You're into each other. I don't care. Because I wouldn't have said maybe there's way less. Maybe the romance is
Maybe the romance.
What's that word, like diffused or.
I'm just curious. The Ella thing, is that a romance?
Like less. I mean,
it's
they're
already established.
No, it's
Okay,
like
so
they're
that makes it less.
Yeah, so it feels
your
maybe
face.
like it's less page time for the romance. But I will say that I feel really lost with the world building, and there hasn't been anything to break me out of my like feeling just like mixed or like neutral feeling about like reading it, sort of with the trope setup that it was. I was surprised that it was like a advanced world with like phones and guns and stuff. I was like,
Cars
oh, okay,
and
interesting.
yeah.
Like that's
I was really
cars.
confused.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not going to give it a number because I haven't really finished. Like I haven't
You don't do
finished
that
it.
anyways.
Yeah, like it wouldn't be higher than a 2 if I finished this, unless it like really surprised me. And we're
Which I
not
don't
going to
think
find
it
out.
I don't think it
So,
would. I mean, Marie and Kate liked it, so we can't. Or spoiling
You
it.
can
Marie liked
be
it.
clear on your opinions. Like it won't
think-
hurt me if
yeah. Okay.
it.
When we get to the spoiler section, I want to guess where I want to give my guesses of where I think certain storylines are going, and you guys can.
Oh
let
yeah,
me
that'd
know.
be fun.
Yeah,
We need to hear that.
I think that brings it to me. I was excited to read this book because Penelope is Leslie Penelope, who wrote The Monsters We Defy, which was one of my top 10 books of last year, which I absolutely friggin' loved and thought was amazing. The Monsters We Defy, though, is historical fantasy set in the 1920s in Washington, D.C., and follows like a heist plot. This book, I think I was really, really into it for the first 50 pages, and I read the short one, so keep that in mind. The first the first setting, the first like action, I was like, yes, I'm loving this. And then we took a detour and went to a different setting, and I'm keeping the spoiler free, but like the second setting that I was just like, I don't care. And all of the tropes that came into it in the second half of the book, I was so bored. I was like, this is so overdone. These things have been done before. There's nothing new happening in this book. I did like Jax and Jasminda. I thought like I liked a lot about their relationship, but it was very like it's been done. Like it was not a new there was no new ground was tread in this book. The world building was terrible. She could not decide what she wanted to do with the world building. Like in the first part of the book, I thought we were going to get a cool, like steampunky Wild West kind of feel, like Frontierland, like very, technology just starting to appear, and like, because like there's a scene at the very beginning of the book with like a car, and everyone's like really impressed by the car, but they still have like flash photography, like the big old fashioned cameras that like they set up on the tripod and take pictures. So like the juxtaposition of those two things, I was like, oh well, that's really interesting. But then like later on in the book, like we lose that, and like the army has guns and there's cars everywhere and like technology. It's just it doesn't make sense. They're like living in a castle, but everything is super modern, and like the world building was awful. And I also really felt like the world building, there were a lot of things that were baked into the like cultures that didn't necessarily pay off at the end. Like I felt like it didn't make sense with the conclusion of the book, the way that the cultures were acting throughout. And like I'm a big proponent of like, if you're going to go to the trouble of like creating a culture, like you need to think that shit through and make sure it lines up with your plot, which I didn't think it really did. So that's I think 3 stars for this one. I haven't actually rated it on Goodreads yet, but there were things that I liked. I think some of the discussion, like the thematic discussion of like what it's like to be a person of mixed race when you look like one culture, and that precludes you from being able to fit in with the other one, but that at the same time like you can't fit into the culture that you look like because of having that mixed heritage, and like the conflict that creates within a person. I thought that element, if there had been more of that, I would have liked this book more, because like Jasminda like struggles with that a little bit, but then it goes in a really predictable way at the end. So yeah, that's my general thoughts.
And Sarah, you read the short one, right? Just to confirm. I will say that like one of the things I noticed when I was comparing the audio of the medium length one and the short is that all of the world building, like the magic world building, not the like setting world building, but that was added in. So there wasn't any of it in the short one. So I do think that would have had I don't think it would have changed your opinion a lot, but I think there was a lot of world building that was like one of the major edits that got put in, for what it's worth. I feel like for context, I'm giving this a 3.5. But that's specifically if I'm looking at it as like a fantasy romance, because if it's billed as like what on Goodreads it says it's like an epic fantasy, it would be much lower. It probably would be in like the 2 stars for me. I think this is not a good epic fantasy, but I enjoyed it as like a fantasy romance. I think for me, Jack, like he's kind of a noble, like just like a really good principled type of character, and I like those. Those are like Sarah likes the bad boys. Those are like my kind of
Sarah's more of a bad boy.
Yeah, I'm like, give me the like really good principled noble like guy who's gonna rescue someone. I like those tropes. So I liked him, and I liked Jasmine. The conversation about like her being mixed race and trying to like being a part of the society, and this is where she grew up and this is her world, but at the same time they still seen as like an outsider and everything, just based on how she looks. I felt for her. I thought she was relatable. I also think that part of like my enjoyment was the audio, because I'm only now kind of getting into audio, and so I like just really had a good time listening to it on audio. I don't know how I would have felt physically reading it. I think that played into it a lot. And I went into it thinking I would DNF, because I was just like not that excited about it. And I'd seen someone who has very similar, I'm like a character reader, so people who had similar character thoughts had DNF'd it, and I thought that would just be me. But was pleasantly surprised. So I had a good time with it.
So I think I was wavering between 3.5 and 4. Because I actually enjoyed this way more. I originally wanted to read it because Bethany had reviewed it and really liked it, and that got me interested, along with kind of like the earth powers, which were not at all what I was expecting based on the description of the book. I was expecting like actual earth powers, not
song.
It was it was kind of the way the magic system was handled. I'm curious to see. I probably will continue. Because I'm curious to see what she does with it. Parts of the world building, and I guess for context, I did read the longer version. Parts of the world building had me intrigued, but I want to see more of what she's going to do with it. Just because you have this storyline that's tied into like the kind of like ancestors that I'm really curious about. I do think it's hard for me to fully give it a 4 just because I really don't like when you have cultures that are baked into like a certain eye color and like hair color and everybody has that. It's just not believable to me that they would stay within those lines. I always have a hard time with that. And it does make me think of earlier fantasy, which tended more towards that. But the big selling point for me were the Ella and Ben POVs. That I think if it had just been Jasminda and Jack, this would be more like a 2.5 or a 3 for me. But I felt like the way she tied in Ella and Ben's felt very separate at the beginning, and then the way it gets tied in later, I really liked. And I liked she expands on the ideas of immigration, some of those themes a lot more through Ella. And I liked that a lot. So I think I have sort of the higher end of the rating on this one because I did.
It makes sense. You read that
The log one.
and like her last final version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm kind of sad now that I
Obviously,
didn't
we
read that one.
realized
But
there were
so
holes in
did
stories.
I.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Obviously,
think
you
that's
realized there were
a good end.
issues she needed to address or something. It's not
Yeah, I think she
Actually, I'm
realized
really
that she needed to
interested
expand.
when we get. Oh, sorry. I was just
No,
gonna say
no,
I'm really interested, Kate, once we get into spoilers, how you say that tied in, because I wanted to say like, if Ella and Ben aren't POVs, what is this whole other storyline, and how does it become
It
part
definitely
of it?
ties
And
in.
even at the point I'm at now, I'm
That's
like,
why she
does
needed
this
10K words.
particular person like? Does this particular person that is involved with the Ella and Ben storyline, is it in the other story versions or anyway?
But like, how does
I
that
mean,
change
ooh,
the
I don't
end?
know.
Because that's the thing. Like, are Ella and Ben at the end? Like, the end
That's
must
mine work.
be different because there's no Ella and Ben anywhere in
can't
the
believe
version that
this
I like.
happened.
Those characters aren't even mentioned. Like, they
They
just
don't
don't
exist.
exist.
No, I
Yeah,
think
like the whole magic thing that was like the big obstacle of the middle book isn't in the first book, and I was like, how does that work?
what?
Doesn't make it.
I am
There
was
no-
so.
No
How
magic.
did this
I'm gonna have to
happen?
give
I
a
am, like,
synopsis of what I read. I
flabbergasted.
think.
yes, I think so.
I can't wait to get to spoiler section.
Do we want to?
How do we even have
discuss anything else?
non-spoiler discussion without that?
Yeah, because it's so confusing. This
I
whole
think
thing.
it's kind of hard because
Yeah.
it's confusing. I mean,
Shows
can
the power of
we
connection,
take a
though.
minute to talk about what we would like? No, that we can't do that non-spoiler with because you guys have no idea what I read versus what you read. Never mind. That was a bad thought.
I just think
It's
it's
gonna
we all
be
get
tough
the
to do
same
non-spoiler.
setup. Like, did we all get the
I don't
same
think
setup? Like, the
they
same,
can't
like,
have
if
the
you
same
were
setup because
describing this
Oh, I will say, sorry, this is kind of late into this discussion, but for anyone watching the playback who hasn't read the book and is considering reading the book, it does have content warnings for rape.
Yes,
And that is
Yes.
in, as far as I can tell, it's definitely in the short and the medium version. I'm assuming Kate in the long version.
yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that stays throughout all. Just heads up.
and like a
Is it in
few
the
instances,
second half
like
of the book?
attempted.
There was some
attempted,
attempt-
yeah,
yeah,
in the
I've-
short version,
Mhm.
sexual assault.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 Yes, that was at the very beginning
Okay.
of the version that
If
I
you
read.
were now, I kind of
Pretty
want to
graphic though, too.
Yeah.
here for the vibe. It's going to be some confusing vibes.
I don't think it's a book Cassidy would like anyway.
I honestly don't. Would you recommend this book
Okay.
to anyone? Like that's an honest question. Like who would you recommend this book to? I don't feel like I can recommend this book.
I feel like I'd have to have a lot of caveats to recommend this book. Like, I think I would not recommend it until I've read the rest of the series because I've heard or seen from some reviews that it improves. So I think if I liked the series, I could say, get through this book and then it gets better if it does. But I don't know that I could recommend this very easily.
Because
See, here's the thing.
other
I
books
need
in the
you-
series have high ratings on Goodreads.
I need you all to read The Monsters We Defy and then tell me what you think. Because
Okay.
the
This is-
writing
yeah.
I now
in
see
The
the
Monsters We
Monsters We
Defy, I
Defy is
loved.
like
Yeah, but you love that one, so like.
But
Don't
you
do
said
this.
I was
did you
gonna
say
say,
in the
you were
Discord that you
describing
can
it.
tell it's the same author?
Yeah, I could tell the writing
I'm curious
style,
about that.
like it felt comparable in terms of like the first person perspective, and like Jasminda as a character and the main character in The Monsters We Defy, like they're different, but you can feel the author's voice coming through them, I think, like because like the main character in The Monsters We Defy is a young Black woman, and has trauma in her past that she's like trying to deal with, and so like there were like comparables to Jasminda that I definitely saw, that I could be like, yes, like this is the same voice, but there's no awkward sex scenes in The Monsters We Defy. It is not a romance. There's also, I like that the one of the things I was missing in this book was the many POVs, that like The Monsters We Defy, you get multiple POVs, like there's one main character, but then you get kind of like chapters that are from some of the other perspectives to fill in some of the plot, because it's a heist story, so you have to be able to follow some of the characters, because if you're just following one character, she's not there for everything that's going on in the planning and of the heist, so you kind of need that. But I kind of missed that in this because we don't really get other point of view characters in the short version.
Never read the longer version.
Jasminda and Jack a little bit, but
Okay, so it was
only Jack. Yeah, but Jack was more so in the second half of the book, like only when there was like the political stuff going on. Like in the first half of the book, it was like pretty much all Jasminda.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I think we get some of Jack in the first half in the version I read, but I didn't appreciate.
Yeah, middle has both,
but I didn't need it
because it was like, is this a spoiler? Yeah, it is. I can't say. It happens early on, but still, I'm like, really? You're like, never mind. Well, we'll wait.
Jack was kind of annoying.
Okay, so
basically, just there were moments where there were moments where he was like appreciating how good looking she was, where he probably should have been thinking about like
immediately
and other things.
His life.
He sees her, he's like, oh my god, she's so beautiful. I'm like,
yeah,
that's when I knew Jack was not for me.
Yeah, I think second half he was more annoying than first half.
Yeah.
Actually,
the second half, he was almost as bad as Narampa. There were parts in the second half of this book where I was having Narampa flashbacks.
No.
Yes, agreed.
I do agree.
I'm not going to finish it.
I see what you're saying.
No, I definitely agree. He was way too naive for some of those. Like, come on.
He seems
idealistic.
What's that where you have like a really good, yes, thank you. Yeah. I have no words. Yeah. Okay, I think we should all like, how would you describe if you were like, based on the version that you read, just to see how different the setups are here, how would you like describe what the synopsis of this book is? Like if you're like, doing like a little blurb, like I read in your wrap up or whatever, like this book is blah, blah, blah. How would everyone describe it? Because I want to like, not going to spoilers enough that you would feel confident to like pitch this book. What is the setup and are there immediate differences?
If people in the comments read it, I'd like to hear their
your pitch, your elevator pitch.
Yeah.
I feel like
we always get mixed. It's never been like everybody hates it.
Yeah, everybody loves it. We haven't had one where
everybody loves it, but that's just, we're such different.
I don't know if we can all have a win. I don't know if that's possible.
I don't think it's possible. When you have Maria and Sarah in the same group, that's what I live for.
I was so excited too because the first part of this book,
I was really happy with the way that we. No, go on.
You're good. I was gonna say the first part of this book I was loving, and I was like, and I knew Maria had enjoyed it enough, so I was like, we're gonna have one where we both like it. And then I got to like page 150, and I was like, oh.
I'm rooting for us, Sarah. Mine's Lock Gamora. It's gonna happen.
Oh my god. Okay, you have
read Lies of Lock Gamora yet? You have to.
No, but I'm going to, and I'm gonna love it, and you are gonna love it. We're gonna be able to gush finally.
I like Diane's less than 3 Ds.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like there was more military stuff in this than I was expecting, but there was also the love stuff. So like, I don't know how I would pitch this because it's like fantasy romance if it was trying to be epic fantasy set in a 1920s fantasy world. I
With
don't know.
cell phone,
The
with
technology
phones and-
felt more than 1920s. I don't know. It was weird, but there was
Yeah.
also an
Cell
airship.
phone?
There was an airship in this book, and
Well,
I
they
didn't
not
like
cell phones, but like they had phone communication.
Yeah.
Mhm.
the
Yeah,
radios.
I thought it
They
was
had
more modern.
radios, yeah,
They had radios.
because they were like
yeah.
radioing to the army base, and like there
Back
was
and
a lot
forth.
of military stuff. Because there was like all
Yeah.
the talk of like the breaches,
But then they
and
were
the
like,
army and the
then they
and
were
then like the
riding horses. I
refugee
was just
camp
so confused.
that was like, and they wrote there was buses, and then I don't know.
You're
It was
so right.
I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
The first scene
it's
seems like it's going to be Frontier. That's 100% what I thought when I first picked it up.
Mhm.
I loved that.
I was
like,
excited
prologue.
about that. I was like, we're going to be in the mountains. There's going to be like
Yeah, it was so cool.
snowstorms and avalanches and
knew
wild
it.
magic.
When I was reading that, I was
And then
like,
was
oh, Sarah's
no.
going to eat this right up.
I loved that first part. I did. The first part was like
Yeah.
a 4.5 star for me. Like until they leave the mountains, I was like, yes. Steampunk
Honestly,
Aladdin
we
roll
agree on
reversal.
that. So hey, that's a win. I agree. The first part was best.
Steampunk Aladdin role reversal.
But the whole like chosen one trope that you said, Kristen, that you didn't like that was why you dragged your feet. Like she's the only one who can save the world. Like in my book, it didn't really like that wasn't like a huge part of it until halfway through, and then all of a sudden it was like discovered that she had an ability that was different than other people, and then it was like, oh, she's gonna be the one, and like
Right.
so.
You
But for like
didn't have
the
the
first half of the
stone.
book, it was like.
So
I would
for you, was it-
agree, actually, because I'm at the point
Yeah.
where I'm in. I just heard that like that was how it was pitched on the back, and I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
But then it was like, oh, my Earth song is so small, my cup is small, you know, whatever. And I was like, okay. But then we got to a point where it was like she held something and something happened that didn't happen to everyone else, and I was like, here it is. Actually, I
Yeah.
think it was when Jack first pitched that something to
Spoilers.
her.
Spoiler.
We should get to
Yeah.
spoilers.
We should.
I was like, oh, but then
You're like
yeah,
on the edge.
we gotta get this one. Okay, how would you pitch it? Okay, who read the long? How would you pitch it, Kate? You read the longest version. Same with Kate, but I don't.
I would probably still, I guess that version I would pitch more as epic fantasy with very strong romantic elements, because you still have all of Jasminda stuff that has the very strong romantic elements, but then you have a lot more world building with like Ella and Ben's POVs. And I think to me, I'd pitch it more as a fantasy that deals a lot more with themes of immigration and kind of relationships with different groups, cultural relationships, than I've seen a lot of other fantasies do. Like I can't think of another fantasy that I've read that really dealt with immigration in the same way that it does, and like kind of the effects of the different countries. So I think
Because
I think that was
immigration's
a
a
big
modern
part.
concept. It's not a fantasy concept. In
No,
fantasy
well-
worlds, there are no strong borders. You just go where
They
you want to
have
go.
telephones.
That is the thing.
No, the
like,
Ella. I will say the
biggest
Ella
thing.
POV, Sarah. I would be. I don't want you to have to do this, but I would be curious
Read
to
the long
see
version.
what you thought about the
See if it
Ella.
adds. Yeah.
Even just like the first half. Even
I
just the
might
first
skim.
half.
I have the like longer version on
Skim
Scrib.
Ella
I might
POVs.
skim
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
like
check
skip
out
the
the
parts that
Ella
I already read
chapters.
and see.
Yeah,
What was
I liked her a lot. I liked her way better
She was
than I
cute.
liked Jasminda, if I'm being honest. So
Agreed.
Is she
I just don't
Lagramari
see how
or
it
is she
relates.
Alciran?
she's
Different.
neither one. She's
Yali?
from a
Is she
different
Fremen
country,
or
and she's
from
married to an
Ven-
Elsyrian.
What, is she
Oh,
from the country with the
Yali.
F? Oh,
No,
No,
with the
Yali,
Y.
I think. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, yes. Okay, that was mentioned.
And
in
she's
the book.
married to an Elsyrian, and so she has to live in like a specific part of the city. She's not allowed to leave while her immigration or while her residency.
Wow,
stuff
that would
is
really
being-
strengthen the immigration stuff, because in
Interesting.
mine there's like a
Yeah,
refugee
thank you.
camp of Lagramari that have been coming over
Mm-hmm.
the mountains, and they're not very welcome because the Elsyrians hate the
Yeah.
Lagramari because of all the history
Yeah.
between the two countries. So okay, that would be really adding to
She-
because like
It adds a
Yeah,
lot.
and
I
she
think.
lives like in the main city, but there's like a part of it that's like
Right.
you have to show papers to get in and out, and she doesn't have like a passport that allows her to leave that city or that like part of the city.
Right.
I want to know
Which
how she
causes
ties it.
problem.
Any spoilers yet?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
just
let's go
Okay.
spoilers.
Someone tell me.
Okay. So we'll shift to spoilers for anyone who is sensitive to that.
I mean,
and has not read it
honestly,
yet.
if you're never going to read this book, you should probably just still hang out with us, because I have the feeling that even once we get into spoilers, there's going to be some interesting conversation here.
I think so. All right, what do we want to touch on first?
Okay, first I want
do
to
Ellen,
tell
but-
you
Should
what
we
I
go
read.
biggest to smallest, or smallest to biggest? Yeah. Okay. Go. I
Okay.
love it.
So just like big beats
Oh,
here
should I
for
do
the
my
plot.
guesses?
Oh yeah, you to make your make your guesses. I might not
Make your
understand.
I only have guesses about Jack and Jasminda, so that's
Okay.
so I do know that Jack is fancy pants prince. That just
Prince,
happened where
yeah.
I'm at.
Mhm.
But my guess, okay, so in my version, Jasminda was given this like rock. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a
by
stone.
some of the
The
people.
caldera.
And it's like
stone?
giving her yes, thank you. And it's giving her like flashes of like memories of someone from the past who is so obviously from the first memory, the queen who's sleeping, and her brother is the Allfather. Yes?
Yes.
Very
Yeah.
obvious.
And it was like,
yes.
and she's like, oh, I have to figure this out. And the second one, it's like
Yes.
literally the girl giving her like part of her gift to this guy, and it's like, pick up the pace, Jasminda. What do you mean? She's like, oh, they were near here. Let's go see if I can hunt down some more clues. And you're like, you're missing the very obvious point of this whole thing. Oh my god. Okay, yeah. That was my only guess.
Okay, wait.
Because it was so
So
obvious.
she got the rock before she finds out that he's the prince? Or
Yes.
after she finds out he's the
Yes.
prince?
No, it's before.
Before.
In
Okay,
my
that is
version,
different.
In the
before.
middle book. In the middle book, it's before.
In my version, she gets it after she finds out he's the prince and after they arrive at the capital.
Yeah, the entire.
So it's much later in the book that she gets the rock.
Yeah,
And you get
Or
all those
later,
flashbacks.
like-
And that was the thing where it's like, ooh, she's special. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let me explain what happens in my book, just
Which
like
is
the
because
order
she's-
of
Yeah, I'm
operations
curious.
here, because I really also need you to explain more about Ella and Ben, because they don't exist. They're not a thing in my book. So we start with Jasminda going home. There's like a snowstorm, and she gets caught in the snowstorm. And then she runs into Jack, and he's like dying, and he's like, I'm being chased by the Lagrimari. And she's like, wait, what are you talking about? We're in Alcira. And he thinks she's lying because he thinks he's still in Lagrimar. So then she like is kind of conflicted because she doesn't know what to do. But then the like Lagrimari soldiers catch up, and they still think they're in Lagrimar because she looks Lagrimari because she's got the dark skin and she speaks the language. And they then take him, and she is like going home, and then she realizes that they're also going to where her home is. So she gets home before they do. They show up, and they're like, we're gonna stay here. You have to do your duty to Lagrimar and let us eat all your food and be dicks and try to rape you and rape Jack and like just be absolutely horrible human beings. That leads to a conflict ultimately after like 3 days of her like poisoning them but not poisoning them and like other weird random things. I'm like, this is just very strange. But ultimately the cabin burns down, and her and Jack get away, and they go up in the mountains, and it's still storming 3 days later. Interesting storm, I guess. And then
have
there's like an avalanche.
Thoughts about the storm.
There's an avalanche. Oh, that maybe it was like created by the Earth Singers. I have no idea. Possibly.
Okay, well, that's
and then they
implied,
get
but I meant-
rescued.
Like feelings. I have
Oh.
strong feelings about that storm.
They get rescued. They go in this cave, which is like weird and magical, but in a different way than the Earth Singers. And it turns out, actually, this is the first point where we find out that she's not like other girls, because she can use her
yes,
Earth
I was
song
gonna say,
in the
so that's
cave.
dope.
And
the
she
cave.
gets a vision in the cave that she like sees a blood sacrifice. And then everyone's like, holy shit, you can sing in the cave. That's weird. And then they go to, basically they end up back at the like army base. And then Jack is like, okay, like come with me to the capital. And she's like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. But then she thinks about the fact that her aunt, like her mother's sister, the Alciran side of her family, is in the capital, and she wants to like confront her grandma and be like, yo, why did you never contact me after my mother died? And so she goes with him to the capital. They have some like almost sexy times at the base, and he knows that his brother has died and that he has to be Prince Regent, but he doesn't tell her. So there's like the whole like miscommunication thing. They arrive at the castle in the capital city, and she finds out that he's the Prince Regent because she gets invited to dinner by the Prince Regent, and she shows up and he's the Prince Regent, and she's like, holy shit, this is not cool. And then while she's in the capital, a whole bunch of other shit that I didn't care about happened, because this is where I lost interest. Because then she like goes and visits her grandma, and her grandma is like super rude to her, and then she sees that her Aunt Vanessa is a lesbian and is like hiding in the garage with her girlfriend, and then she also is like basically having sex with Jack every night, which is like super awkward and weird, but he just comes to her because he's trying to deal with all the political stuff, because there's a big refugee camp, because for some reason they brought all the refugees down out of the mountains to the capital city, which like doesn't really make sense why the refugee camp was there, in my opinion, like why they weren't still up in the mountains. Usually refugee camps aren't like in the middle of countries. That didn't really make sense to me. But anyway, everybody's mad about the refugees because there's a lot of like false stuff going in the news, and because they're mad at the refugees and all the refugees are the only Black folks, they also don't like Jacinda, and so there's all this politicking and crap that's happening. And this was the Narampa part that I didn't like, where like Jack is all idealistic and he's like, it's our moral duty to make sure that the refugees are taken care of, and everyone else is like, no, like we don't like you and we're going to get rid of you as Prince Regent unless you marry this stupid woman who your brother was going to marry. And then Jasminda goes to the refugee camp and they give her the rock, and then she starts using her earth song to like see the visions, and she's seeing the different visions, and she's very, very slowly, like way slower. Like after the first vision, I was like, yeah, this is the queen that sleeps, or whatever the heck. It was very obvious, but apparently not for her. But ultimately, the government decides that they're going to expel the refugees after they get a letter from the Allfather being like, hey, we will promise not to go to war with you. Like, we'll sign a peace treaty if you send us back the refugees, because the Allfather knows that this rock exists and wants the rock back. And so all of the refugees are bundled off on buses back to the what was it called? The mantle, like the barrier between the two countries. But the barrier is completely gone, and there's like the Allfather is there, and Jasminda manages to unlock the power of the rock after one of the refugees is shot by an Elsiran guard, and she uses the blood from that as like the sacrifice, and then she makes a whole zone where no one can use Earth Song except her, and then she awakens the sleeping queen chick who comes, and then together they kill the Allfather, and Jack shows up in the airship with Aunt Vanessa's lesbian lover piloting, and they then are basically made king and queen, and they have like a big wedding at the end, and the queen who sleeps is like, I am going to let you be the new king and queen, rule well. And the Allfather is dead, and they never talk about Lagrimar anymore, and so I don't really know what happened to all the people in Lagrimar, like who still supported the Allfather. I don't know. And then at the very, very end, there's like this weird scene, like an epilogue with Darwin, who was like the guy who taught the prince how to speak Lagrimar to allow him to like go and infiltrate Lagrimar at the beginning. And he's like apparently being blackmailed by the queen who sleeps to do something for him, because she's like, do this for me, or Kelsey gets it. I don't remember what the name was. It was probably not Kelsey, but some woman's name. And that was the end. And so that's my description of what I read. So how was it different for all of you?
Does he put her into a dungeon? Does Jack put Jasminda into a dungeon?
At one point, yes.
Oh, I hated that part.
She's going to leave. Mm-hmm. She has decided to leave, and he has her taken to the dungeon. But then Lisbeth, the woman who wants to be the queen,
when the woman you want to marry tries to leave.
Yes. Yeah. And and it's interesting because there was some stuff about like his dad, and how his dad was like an evil abuser of his mother, and like he's like, oh no, I'm turning into my father, and there was like some actual like emotional impact to the whole decision, because then he feels bad and he's going to let her out, but then when he gets there, it turns out that Lisbeth had sent her maid and like sent her to go on the buses with the refugees.
Yeah.
So that's what I read. So how different was it from
It
what
sounds
you
pretty
all
similar to my version, I feel like.
Some of the same plot beats are there. A lot of the same plot
Where does
beats,
the
but they're not
baby
all the
play
same.
in?
The baby.
What baby? There's a baby.
Exactly.
There's no baby.
There's no
No,
baby.
the baby comes in the bigger one.
Is there
bigger
so
part
the
of the
baby's
picture.
not even in the medium size version?
No.
Oh my god.
Is
No.
Ella
What
and Ben
happened
at
with
all
this
in the
book?
medium?
No, Bella
size
and
one?
Ben don't exist at all.
That's
We
so
don't get
funny
it.
because I feel like they bring so much more to the
But
story.
like how
than,
do they tie
like,
in
okay.
to this whole like political
Let's
crap
not.
that's happening?
I pushed us ahead. Kristen and Maria, tell us a little bit about the middle version. What was added
like
on to that?
I didn't read the middle version. I only read the longest one.
Maria and
so.
I read the middle one,
Oh,
but I feel
sorry.
like it was all the major plot beats were the same.
Yeah, what I noticed, because I was kind of comparing them as I was going, I noticed it was more character moments that were embellished. So they were like, there were more conversations between her and Jack. Like I remember there was a whole scene where after I think it's right before Jack's attempted rape scene happens, they have a really long conversation. I forget what about, but it was like about their like they kind of get to know each other more.
Yeah, I
like it
remember that
kind of adds to their dynamic, and so then it makes a bit more sense when they kind of start liking each other. There was a lot more with the with Aunt Vanessa. She like meets her in a different way in the medium one. There is no grandmother. I think was it grandfather, Kristen? Was that what it was?
Yeah, and it was more about the aunt. Like I don't think she
Yeah,
really
the grandfather was like
about-
barely in it, and it was
And
more
we
the
got
aunt.
the aunt with her girlfriend quite a bit.
Yeah,
And
we
like
saw
See,
them
I would have liked
together at the
that. I wanted
refugee site.
more of Aunt Vanessa.
And did you get the whole scene of how the aunt goes to Jack and says she's on the bus, you need to do something, and she offers her girlfriend is like a good pilot?
It's like very short. It was like she goes and she like insists she has to see the prince, and then when he sees her,
Yeah.
she's like, "Yeah, you have to go, my niece Jasminda, who is like an Alcerian. She's been put on the bus like with the refugees because she doesn't know Jack and she doesn't know the relationship between Jack
Yeah.
and Jasminda." And then Jack is like, "Yes, we have to do something," and they like try to radio and they can't. And so then he tells like the usher guy, the like manservant, he's like, "I need a pilot," and then she goes, "Oh, I have a friend who's a pilot."
Yeah, that's
Conveniently.
And then,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
So like that,
conveniently.
they were just like more. They were longer scenes, and like
just
more
expanded on scenes that
Yeah,
already
so
existed.
characters were developed a bit, and then the quotes at the beginning were added, which I thought was really cool. Like I'm sad that the short version didn't have that.
Yeah, I'd
Because
like
every
It had,
chapter
like,
had
little-
like a really cool kind of like a fable sort of quote. Is that how you describe it? Like kind of like
yeah, like
a
that
snippet
meant
of
something to the
folklore.
world. Yeah.
yeah.
I
Maybe
More
actually
world
hated
building that I
those.
was missing.
You hated those, Kristen?
Yes,
I like
because for a very specific reason. Because I generally enjoy when books include something like that if it adds to the story. Like for example, in Mistborn, when you're getting the diary entries or the Crown and Feather series, it's like diaries or letter, and it plays into. Whereas this was just like, here's a random folklore story, and I was just like, this is nothing.
I thought they
Do
kind of,
they
like,
play in
scenes
later?
tied
Did they
in.
tie in? Because I stopped reading them at a certain point.
No, I felt like
this
the
is
scenes
nothing.
kind of tied in like a
I
very
think it
like
was kind of-
metaphorical way.
I
don't know if you
care
guys
less about
agreed,
that.
but-
Yeah,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
folklore.
yeah.
I just
I
thought they
think
were
that
like,
was like
That's fair.
a way to help with the world building a little bit. I don't know. I can understand not liking that. If
I thought they were
you
cool.
just put that into the thing,
Yeah.
but I like them. I like
Yeah.
them. And at
In
the
the-
end, in your version, Sarah, does she have to be touching the queen for the power? It's like the queen really does it all. It's just like tethered magic. Or
Yeah,
something.
because she created the dead zone with the caldera because she had the spell that stopped people from being able to use their earth song, and she like created a dead zone. And then she was the only one who could use her earth song. So when the queen woke back up, she had to touch the queen, and then the queen was technically working through her.
Through her.
But then the queen was like gonna let the Allfather go or whatever, or give him a hug again,
Yeah,
and be
like-
an idiot. And
It's
then
her brother.
Jasminda stabbed the Allfather, and then the queen put all of the evil stolen song, which was like corrupted in the Allfather, into the knife. And I feel like that has to play a role in later books, because that was the
so.
thing where I was like, oh, like this knife full of evil earth song, like that's got to be a thing
Yeah.
later. That's a powerful
There's
artifact.
no way that's gonna cause problems later on.
No.
Sarah, I
then
don't
it-
think you had the scene like before they get to the cave where nobody can use Earth Song except for her. did you have the scene with the stone where she like accidentally, what was it, Kristen, that I read it a while ago. I'm like the one who read it the earliest. But there was something with the stone where they like go to a stone and she cracks it, and like they think that they ruined their chance to save the mantle. I think that wasn't in the short. Like all of that stuff was pulled out of the short.
Okay, so in that one, it was just like basically when Jack came back across the mantle back into Elsira, somebody on the other side who was a rebel had given him a stone, and it was like a map to this place that was like the cornerstone of the mantle.
That was not at all the stone in mine.
It was a little bit broken.
That was like the world building.
This was an additional stone, and the mantle was like cracked. But if somebody with Earthsong could go to the mantle and fix the cornerstone, then it would be permanently sealed again. And so that's when Jack and Jasminda like leave her house after it burns down. That's the first thing that happens in the mountain, is that they do this.
That was not in my book.
And when Jasminda tries to fix it, it actually like breaks the whole mantle, and that's how there's no mantle at the end, I'm guessing.
And
it's like, and then they run into the other refugees, and then she gets the other stone.
Okay, so there's no avalanche? Was there an avalanche that
you're describing with the thing about the storm, you described a lot more description in that it was a snowstorm. Was that a descriptor in the version that I read? Because they kept referencing a storm, but then it was like, and it kept going on, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like there was like no description ever. They just kept using the word, "Oh, this storm is really lasting. Oh, this storm's coming in." Meanwhile, they're like trying to escape one night, and the guard like turns and can see them because the moon is visible, and you're like, but then the next thing it's like, oh gosh, we like can't like get down this mountain because the storm. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What storm?
I guess I assumed it was a snowstorm.
A bigger role.
Oh, okay.
It's definitely in the longer book. It's definitely indicated that it's a snowstorm and that it is not a natural snowstorm.
Yes, that was. I did pick up that it was not natural.
Not natural.
That's the vibe.
It's not natural in the middle too.
Yeah, that's what the vibe.
In the short version, there was no inkling that this was not a natural snowstorm. In fact, she talks about how this is the exact same kind of snowstorm that killed her brothers and her dad, that they disappeared in a few years prior, and that, oh my gosh, that snowstorm was like, she has to get home before the snowstorm, otherwise she's scared she's going to freeze to death on the mountain like her brothers and her dad.
Yeah, and
like there was no indication
that they're connected. Like I think she at the beginning has no idea of the connection. It's only as the story goes and she finds out more about the true father that it's kind of revealed that he uses the storms to like implement his will across the mantle, basically.
Yeah, there's like there are added POVs of EO and the queen's name, who's like the queen and Allfather in the middle book too. Like there were more of the flashback scenes. Like she holds the stone more, and then also just as like a character reader, I want to throw in that like in that whole obstacle where she goes and before she breaks the stone and blah blah blah, all that stuff. There's like they have to face like their worst fears, sort of thing. So there was like that with her family that was added in. So I feel like those were the moments that you middle book did. Yeah.
It sounds so convoluted the way we're talking about it.
I know.
I'm so excited for Kate and I to tell you about Ella and Ben.
Yes, that's what we're waiting for.
Please.
Yeah, Kate, we're ready for it.
I don't have much to contribute because I haven't read much. So Kate, you go and I'll chip in additional points if I feel relevant.
Fair enough. So at the beginning, you just get Ella's point of view, and she is an immigrant from Yali, I think is what it is, which is a neighboring country that she's basically immigrated, married an Elsirian, so she's stuck in Portside because she's not allowed to leave that. She's basically in a queue to get her citizenship, but it takes years. So she's basically stuck waiting until they get that figured out. And then the whole storyline is that the guy she's married to, that you don't find this out until like later on, I think, but her husband is actually the assistant to Jack. He's like his administrative guy. And so there's that connection. And then Ella's sister had previously come as part of the sisterhood. I don't know how big of a part they play in any of the other versions, but it's like this religious group that reports to the queen, essentially, the queen who sleeps. And Ella has this whole intrigue thing where her blood sister is part of this sisterhood and had like a surprise baby that she didn't tell the family about. And she's been completely out of contact with all her family until Ella's sister sends her a telegram, basically, that says, "Come, I need your help." So she goes to get the baby. The sisterhood basically steals the baby away.
And the sister is like, "Don't let the high priestess
Yeah,
get
the sister
her hands
doesn't
on my
want.
son," like right
Wow.
before she passes
Yeah,
away.
she's really, really worried about that. Her sister dies as part of childbirth. And then so the rest of the story is Ella, who's kind of this immigrant who doesn't have a ton of connections, going up against this really powerful like head of this sisterhood.
religion.
And they keep getting her in trouble because she's an immigrant. And so as she's investigating, she goes places she's not supposed to be without papers. And
That's a totally different book.
It all ends up getting connected. Then at the end, you find out that the baby is actually the like bastard child of her sister, and then this preacher who's for like a rival kind of cult.
The Dominionists.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. There was one
against
mention of the
them.
Dominionists at the end of my book.
Yeah, so
I don't remember.
the baby was going to be used as blackmail against this preacher guy so that the sisterhood could kind of control him and make sure he wasn't a threat. And then they end up.
What does
Ella
that have
ends
to
up
do with the
getting
Allfather?
nothing.
Yeah, I'm so
Nothing
confused.
whatsoever, except
Oh, okay.
that the sisterhood might be influencing the queen, because at the end it's shown like this leader of the sisterhood is like in close like contact with the queen and is talking to her and like kind of guiding her on some things. So it's kind of implicated that maybe she might win the queen over to her side. So it's this whole, that's where all the immigration stuff comes
But
in.
at the end of
is
book
with
one, the queen is not the queen anymore. She gives up the throne to Jack and
To
Jasminda.
She gives it up, but she's still considered the queen who sleeps. She's not technically the queen.
She's like a
anymore.
deity,
like
I
the
know.
head of their
Yeah.
religion. Yeah, sort
Yeah.
of in a way.
She's
yeah.
still a big part of the picture. So
I was trying
That
to see
is
if
so
they
different
mentioned-
though.
Wow,
Because
I
people,
thought this
but-
baby was
At
like
the
going to
very
be like
end-
some prophesied important thing, and I was like, he's got to be part of the other books.
No,
no,
I-
he's
they're
basically
Russian.
blackmail.
Nope. Okay.
Well,
At the very
If he
end,
continues- Oh, you go ahead, sir.
I was just gonna say at the very end of the version of the book that I read, there was a newspaper clipping, like the writing from the newspaper that said, after the queen who sleeps woke up, all of the people in Alcira who are racist bastards were like, holy shit, she's black. This is blasphemy. We can't worship someone who's black. So they all convert to the Dominionist side. Like it talks about how like there's a rise in people going to the Dominionist churches and abandoning the old faith because they're racist bastards. Because
Whoa.
like that's the
Yeah,
only
wait,
mention
how
of
come all of
Dominionists
the-
anywhere.
Oh.
Yeah, no, they're a bigger part. In the long book, you get more of, through Ella's POV, you can see that more and more people are joining the Dominionists because they are basically kind of it feels like almost more socialist type
I was
rhetoric
gonna say
and
that.
like
Yeah.
kind of trying to get people more in that line versus the monarchy. So there's kind of like that split,
Oh, interesting.
right? And so that's growing, but then there is the same newspaper clipping at the end that is indicating that some of the people who had been in favor of the monarchy until they figured out that their queen was black. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, the Alcirians, that was like their one defining feature,
Whoa.
racist. Like
Yeah.
other than Jack, and Jack was
Yeah.
like the only one out of all of them who was like, no, we should
Yeah.
treat all people equal no matter the color of their skin. And he's like literally
Yeah.
the only one. Yet also he manages to completely be oblivious to his privilege as a white person
True.
in the country, as well as the friggin' prince. Like he's just, that's what I was really annoyed by his lack. Like he's so not like
thought it was a
understanding of where
little more developed.
Jasminda is coming from, because
Yeah.
Jasminda is in like a really tough position because she loves him, but like she doesn't fit. She doesn't fit anywhere. She doesn't fit in Lagrimar,
Yeah.
she doesn't fit in Elsira. So she's really at odds and ends, and she just like wants to live in the mountains and be left the hell alone. And he just doesn't seem to get it. And like he throws her in the damn dungeon. Yeah, Jack was not my
the
hero.
dungeon. I hated the dungeon. This is
I
interesting.
wanna
This
say
is
we
what I'm
got-
wondering. Like, if you read the full version, do you need to read the full version to appreciate the second one, or are they completely different? Or do you think we got the plot beats in our versions?
I mean, I
Wait,
don't
continue on.
know, because not
know.
having Ella would make a big difference, I feel like, in terms of getting some of those world building elements. Like, will you like why the sisterhood with the queen? Like, are you really gonna make connections with
the queen that sleeps, the only way that she was able to communicate was through dreams in the book that I read, and it sounded like more so that she could choose who she was speaking to, because at the end, like, she's speaking to Darwin. And I just remember now one thing that I forgot. She tells him to go get the father and the two brothers of the main character. That's what she tells him at the end. So that was the intriguing bit that I was like, oh shit, they're not dead. But then the other thing that I don't understand is how Jasminda is related to the queen who sleeps. And I don't know if it gives any more indication in the longer version. Because at the end it says, only blood of my blood can use the Caldera stone to enact the spell that Yllis had come up with.
Well,
and yet, so who is she related to? Because Eo and the Queen Who Sleeps, or whatever his name was, Arrow, I can't remember.
I kind of felt like there was a little bit of a mystery. I felt like there was a little bit of a mystery about who Jasminda's father was. And maybe that was explored in the second half of the book. But I felt like when Jasminda brings up who her father is to the refugees, there's like some like, you know, like people like looking at each other, like making eye contact with each other and then being like, oh yeah, I used to know him. So like my guess would be through that in some way. But you're right, like as far as I have gotten, the queen and the brother don't have kids. Or I mean like the Allfather has like the Allfather has a shit ton of kids.
He has a ton of kids.
So isn't that as long as the dad was?
I thought, didn't it say something about how all of they were barren? There was something in my book about like how all the like they've sterilized people in the harem or something.
Well,
there was something, or maybe they sterilized the soldiers. I can't remember. There was definitely something about people against their will being sterilized.
I don't
not being able to have children.
Their song out. Like they took away all their songs.
No, yeah, that. But there was also something about because all the girls end up in the harem. I'm trying to remember now.
How did does this get answered? How Jasminda's father had his song? Because do you remember when they first run into the Lagrimaries, and maybe this was only in the long version or whatever, where she was like, "Oh, can't one of you guys heal Jack?" And they're like, "Oh no, everyone in my squad has." Whatever, donated their song. And she was like, they haven't been given it back yet. And they're like, it's never given back. What are you talking about? And she's like, you know? So I'm like, what story did her dad tell her that A, she thought that was a thing? And B, how then did her father have
unless he escaped as a kid, right? Like that's the thing. Cause like the kids that come over the mantle have their song.
But the implication was that he was a soldier.
That's true.
Who got stuck on the other side, so he would have been an adult.
Yeah, that's true.
Was he one of the past cantors, or was that what they were called? Cantors?
Cantors, yeah. I don't know.
I'm just throwing it. I have no stakes in the game.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean they never cover it. I think he could have been one of the keepers, that rebel group, if he was able to like stay away long enough.
Hide away.
Yeah.
But it did say that he was a soldier. It did say that he was a soldier who got stuck, that he was like an injured soldier or something.
But that was that was the story that she,
I guess.
She said something to her, okay, when she's meeting the refugees in the mountain, she says something about her dad being a soldier who was a prisoner of war. And they're like, that's the story that he told you? No, he abandoned his squadron. And they're like, and then the other lady's like, shh, no. It's fine. Your dad was cool. Like that was the gist.
I don't remember this in the middle one.
I don't remember that. Yeah.
I think that might be a big book thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just really quickly to the comments, I wanted to say for Kristen's that I think from my research, the second book is completely different characters, and then the third book brings all of them back together. Like I think they're, or even the fourth, there might be like 3 books of different characters, and then I know that like Jasmine, I think they all come back together in the last one. So, but I'm not sure like if the world building would get confusing or not, or if like
also
she knows.
And there's
people
a
read
ton of novellas. There's a ton of novellas in the series,
Yeah.
so I don't know how important those are. I was like trying to figure out, and like there's so many novellas in this.
But I'm assuming that like she would know not everyone read the same version and maybe would try to kind of weave in like, you know, kind of reminders of things. And then for
Why
Alana,
did her publishers let her
So
do
that
this?
yeah, so I think that we need to address that. Why are there so many different editions? Well,
Yeah.
she self-published first.
The first one.
So
one
in
you
her
read.
the version that I read was self-published. So it probably the level of editing
Detail.
and things like that end up happening in self-pub are by definition
Minimal.
different, right?
Yeah.
Than traditional publishing. Then she was picked up by a traditional publisher, and they released the version that's the audiobook version that you two listened to, Kristen and Maria.
Hardcover.
And then they released a special edition
paperback.
That was the extended paperback version. So obviously she couldn't let this book go. And there were things like maybe she was working on book 2 and book 3 with the traditional publisher and was like, I need to go back and change book 1 because I didn't explain things in a way because now I have all these plot things that, you know, because I think only the first one was published indie. Like I think the other ones only were published ever traditionally published. So that's probably what happened is in work. This is my guess. I don't know for sure. I'm sure we could probably find some interviews with her or something, or one of us could send her an email. She's a small enough author. I'm sure she'd probably be happy to answer our questions. But yeah, I bet that's what it was, is that she was like, holy shit, I need to like make this whole thing about Queen of Dreams and the Dominionists, and I didn't include it in the first book. So let's go back and rewrite some stuff.
My research, if I remember correctly, I think what happened is it was self-pub and indie. It got picked up, but they weren't sure if she would get like sequels for the contract deal, so they just edited the self-pub a bit more to put it out as like a product on its own. And then they were like, "Oh, this is doing well enough for us to essentially give more money for more books."
Did it do well?
Well, it did well enough for more books
to get.
So they then we're like, okay, well now that she's writing more books, and then she realized that she needed to add more stuff in. But that was my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like obviously, I think it would be cleaner if they like had picked it up as a trad and did the full edits, and then had
Time Magazine best book of 2018.
Yeah, I think it did
best fantasy book of 2018.
Well.
Time Magazine.
How have I never heard of this?
I never heard of it. I never heard of it until Kate put it on the list.
I didn't hear of it until Bethany reviewed it. So
I heard of it after I read the Monsters We Defy, because I looked up Leslie Penelope because I wanted to see other stuff that she had written, because I really enjoyed that book, and because that's her latest 2022 release. I don't know if she has anything else coming out anytime soon either.
I don't know.
About the world building, just as well. In my opinion, it sounds like more world building than in the shorter versions, but I would still say not a satisfactory amount of world building.
Yeah, I feel like she might expand on it in the future books, but I don't think. I felt like this definitely felt like a debut, like where she didn't really have it figured out as much as the world building elements, because it was so haphazard.
I think that's like the nature of coming back to a work and keep adding to it. It's not going to be.
But even the short version was like the world building. It doesn't make sense because, like, why do we have cars and radios and guns and horses and people living in the bush with no running water and like just primitive style towns on the frontier, and
where there's
they're living in a castle, having balls, like big, like, you know, the like formal dinners in the style of like a medieval castle, and there's airships and like what the hell.
It's mentioned like really briefly just because Jasminda like just kind of got to the city Razira or whatever in the where I'm at, and it mentions that like there are skyscrapers in Yali, and I'm just like, what? This was
it's so confusing.
Yeah.
You had one phone.
Well, yeah,
in your
Yali
town.
is the one who created the airship. The airship is from Yali that he has at the end. And I'm like, why don't they just have planes? Like, why is it an airship? If you have cars and buses and automatic, like they have rifles. Like it's not just like they have blunderbusses and muskets.
Yeah,
like they talk about their automatic weapons.
Yeah. And again, they have tanks at the end.
Tanks?
The spread is very wide.
This is so.
It's all over the place.
I
Yeah.
need fan art. This
And
is what always
again,
happens to me.
what kind of storm was it, El Penelope?
It was
No,
definitely a
same.
snowstorm, Kristen. It was definitely a snowstorm.
It was definitely a snowstorm.
But she did do a lot of descriptions. Yeah.
It just kept saying the word storm over
You
and over
don't
again.
freeze
Meanwhile,
to
they're
death in a rainstorm.
casually-
A thunderstorm
No,
they're
doesn't
like
leave your
casually-
bodies on the mountain.
if the storm was so severe that they like couldn't, like, how are they doing all of this? You know what? It's
See, and
sticking-
even the
sticking
cover,
point.
the cover of the long version, like with the horses and they've got the spears, and like it leads you to believe it's something if it's not.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, their
I
army is
was
not riding
so-
horses. Like what the
No, with lances and like let's
Yeah.
go. It's like that.
Well-
It wasn't like that.
And the long version
the long
does have
version.
at the end that basically Lagrimar has horses and cannons that they're bringing up to the mantle, and then
But that would make sense if they're like
Elvira has
completely
the actual
magically
modern stuff.
Yeah, but there's supposed to be
If
a
they were-
500 years that they've been separated. So if there's been 500 years, how come they
Yeah,
have
but they've
cannons? But
got,
everybody
like,
like
a tyrant who like steals all of their magic, you know, like that's it doesn't feel like a setting where great minds would be
Developing new
technologically
technology.
Exactly. Yeah. He's
Yeah,
gotta
what I'm
keep
saying is the
populace
the
down.
gap between muskets and rifles and automatic weapons is like less than 200 years in real time, right? Like when you look at like 1700s, you've got muskets up to World War I when you have automatic weapons, right? So that's only like a couple hundred year spread. So if they're 500 years that they've been separated, I feel like the Lagrimari shouldn't have guns at all. Like unless
But
they
also
just
they're
like developed the
separated
guns
and-
500 years ago and then never kept advancing. I don't know. It did not make logical sense. It really did not. I don't think there's any way we cannot logic our way out of figuring out why there was this
Yeah.
weird mix of things.
She wanted to feel like a Western at the beginning, and
Yeah.
then she thought, actually, you know, it would be great if they had cars they could get
Alice,
around a little bit
Technology.
quicker.
and then we're gonna go to a castle and act like
Yeah.
it's like a friggin' medieval castle
Well,
where
he's the
manservants and
prince.
yeah.
He needs to be in a castle.
Were you surprised that he was the prince?
No.
No, me neither.
Well,
I
I
saw
thought
some
that he was
reviews
gonna
were
be
saying they were
someone-
shocked.
It
Really?
was super. It was pretty clear very early on, based on like some stuff that was going on in his head, that he was like someone important. I wouldn't have necessarily guessed Prince, but
Yeah. Well, I guess he didn't.
when
know
it
he was
happened,
the
you're like,
prince either.
oh, it's this
Yeah.
story, you know. Like
Kate, are
Sarah
you going to
said.
continue on?
Hmm?
Are you going to continue on? I think the
Yeah.
rest of us, it's pretty
No,
clear.
I am very interested to see what she does with the rest of it. So, and it's weird because the synopsis for the second one sounds like a fantasy romance, but the reviews I've seen say it leans more epic fantasy. So,
But like this
I'm
one in
really
general was also billed as epic fantasy, and it's
Yeah.
not real. Like I don't know.
but it's
And there
like
were
last time it
multiple
was the
cringy sex
synopsis
scenes.
sounded epic.
Cringy. We haven't
Oh,
talked
they
about that
were.
enough. It's super cringy. Like I was like,
I skimmed
None of
it.
the reviews for book one talk about how it's like.
I'm gonna go back and read that sex scene that I just skimmed over to hear how cringy.
for me to
it is.
read it
I
out
don't-
loud, and she's
yeah.
like feeling against his whatever, and I'm like,
Yeah,
the words
it's
she's
not
using,
I
I'm like,
don't think that.
Moment of silence, please,
Hey,
for
did
my
you
first smut audio scene.
oh yeah, that's the worst one. That's
I know.
awful. Were you hitting that 30-second skip button?
I was just like, what is that? What do people do when these things come up?
Okay.
The
Now
first
you need
one
to
was
go to the
like,
opposite
oh,
end of the spectrum and listen to "It Happened One Summer" on audio.
by Tessa Bailey.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Just that one though. I didn't like the sequel.
It was mixed. Yeah.
You know what was kind of funny about the sex scenes is something actually that like makes me think about other fantasy and like what the equivalent would be in like medieval based fantasy, but where she talks about how like she doesn't, obviously Jasminda doesn't have like any experience with sex. She's been living by herself in the mountains and whatever, and she talks about finding the magazine that her brothers had, which is essentially like a Playboy magazine, and like seeing the women. I don't know if that was in the other versions, but in the version I read, she talks about like seeing this Playboy magazine
I don't
essentially
think
that her
she would
brothers
have
had
I
been
don't
hidden.
remember that either.
Yeah.
And then, well, then when in the first time she has sex with
Publishing
Jack,
editors
she's
cut
like
that
talking about how she like doesn't know how to get him to follow her to the bed or something so she like poses the way that the women did in her brother's magazine. Like there's a call
No,
back
no,
in one of the
no,
sex
I
scenes.
do not
I
think
didn't-
that was in the
Interesting.
long
Editor was
version.
like, cut
That
that
was
out.
not there.
She was like really trying to seduce him, but not like that.
Yeah, no, it
But then
wasn't quite
also-
that awkward.
But like,
Oh my
I mean,
gosh,
like
it's
what
so
what
funny.
did pornography look like in it, like in other fantasy books? I've never read a fantasy book that talked about
Right.
pornography.
Yeah,
Like
Um,
that's
they
kind of
talk about
interesting.
por-
Am I
there's
allowed to say that
pornography
word
in
on your
the
Gideon
channel?
Live.
the fact that they had that in this book is interesting. Like what
I was
they're
just
making-
gonna say there's a magazine,
Like a printing
there's, like
press?
printing, yeah. Except for the town still only has one telephone, but the kids
Yeah,
have.
like-
Oh no, they had to
Porn
order it in,
technology.
right? They ordered it in, I guess. Like
There's porn mentioned quite a
delivered it?
bit
Mail
in
order.
Gideon the
mail
Ninth.
order Playboy.
Mail order Playboy. Sarah, there's porn mentioned in Gideon the Ninth. Gideon is
Okay,
like
I haven't
the
read that one yet.
magazine
Haven't read that yet.
aficionado.
Is there any romance in the Monsters We Defy, or whatever the Monsters one was? that
There
right?
is a romance subplot, but it's I don't think there's any like actual explicit sex scenes. Like there's a bit of a
Did
like
she write that after?
it's very light on the romance.
Yeah, that came
She
out
wrote it,
last
yeah,
year, I
like
think.
that's just new, like 2022. It came out in the fall, I think. So it's
And she
like
goes
very
by
new.
Leslie
She
on
wrote
that
it during
one.
the pandemic. Yes, it's marketed as Leslie Penelope, not L
Not L.
Penelope. So because it's not I mean it's very light on the fantasy. It's much more historical fiction. The only like fantasy elements is that the main character is a crossroads child, so like was born at a crossroads, so she can communicate with these spirits called enigmas, and she helps people make deals with the enigmas. They're basically like devils, right? So like people will come to her and be like, I want to marry this guy, but he doesn't love me. Help me make a deal. And she's like, okay, but this is going to turn out bad for you. And they're like, no, I really want it. And so she like calls up the enigma, and the enigma makes the deal. And then obviously something bad happens every time. So because she shouldn't make deals with devils. But that's like really the only like supernatural like is all this stuff with the devils, and like they're trying to get a magical ring, but like the world itself is 1920s Washington DC, and so you have
See,
all
that's
the
a bit of a turn off for me, but everything else sounds cool. I don't know what it is. Like, I love aesthetically the 20s, like all that like Gatsby stuff, but stuff like books set in the 20s, I'm just like, I see that and I immediately am
thought
like, no, bookish.
the interesting thing about the monsters
whatever.
we
Anti-buzzword.
defy
Yeah,
is
thank
that it's set in the 20s, but it's set in a like a black community in Washington DC, which I can't remember what the name of it
It's
is.
more
It's been a while
jazz.
since I read that book. But there's like it juxtaposes the like rich black folks in the neighborhood who are like having these big parties, and like there's a lot of the like jazz and the illegal liquor and like all that stuff. But it juxtaposes that with the people who are living in poverty and just trying to get by. Like, because keep in mind, 1920, that's
Yeah.
only like, you know, less than 100 years after the Civil War. So you still have like the echoes of
Yeah.
chattel slavery in the States and stuff. And so there's like a
Yeah,
lot of
that's a good
poverty
point.
in her community as well. And so like you see both sides of it, because like she's living in near poverty, like the main character, like she's barely getting by. She has a job, and like she's just scraping by, and then she has to steal this ring from this really rich black woman who's like a well-known, like I can't remember if she's a theater, like an actress or something, or a musician, I can't remember, dancer or something like that. And so they go to like these big parties and stuff. So it like really, I like that, because I think like when we see 1920s and we think like Gatsby and we think all of that like glitz and glamour,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
that was one part of the experience of the 1920s.
Yeah, I'd still be curious to try that one. I think that's
I
more
see
my
someone in the
thing
comments
than
said
this
they thought it was boring.
one. They
I think
did.
a lot of people
Yeah.
who like fantasy find historical fantasy less interesting, so
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
I'm in
Yeah,
that
I
category.
think that's true. think
I
people
don't
get
know,
kind of
like that book
fantasy.
though, it's a heist book. Like Monsters We Defy, it's about a heist, which I don't know, like for historical fantasy, I think it's particularly engaging. So if you didn't like that one, don't try any
How
other
quickly
historical
does it get
fantasy.
into heist? How quickly does it get into
Um,
like fun heist stuff?
So pretty much right away, because like right at the very beginning, she's like talking to the enigma, and then the enigma is like, hey, we want this ring, like you have to get it for us. And then there's like they try, yeah, if you were expecting more magic, it is lighter on the magic, and it's more like folk magic,
Which is true for
like,
a lot
or,
of
like,
historical fantasy, I feel like.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
complaint.
but yeah,
usually.
and then like the middle of the book is assembling the team because they like try one thing to get the ring, and then it's like, oh well, that didn't work, so we got to try harder, and so then they like assemble the crew, which I really love that kind of thing, right? Like where you have to like go and she like finds like I think it's like 4 or 5 other people that also have deals with enigmas that have different abilities.
Skills.
Yeah.
Sarah,
and
you need to
yeah,
read Adventures
like-
of Amina if you haven't yet.
I haven't yet. It is on my list. I'm actually on the wait list at my library since I've been on the book buying ban, which I
Getting through back
technically
together,
broke. But
and then
For
same
which
complaint of like more historical fiction than fantasy, very little magic.
Adventures of Elmina Sarafi.
Oh,
is that what
Amina
it's called?
Al-Sarafi.
Chakraborty's
Oh,
new
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Wait, have you read it, Maria?
I did not like it that much. It was.
I was
360.
gonna say I'm hearing
Yeah.
Kristen, you
I DNF'd
temporarily
it.
DNF'd
For
it.
now.
Yeah. I
Hey,
had
did
to
you
tell
start it? You were supposed to.
No, I've started it. I had to travel, so I haven't continued with it yet. But I
I've
actually
been
really
hitting
like
postpone.
You like it?
So, mhm.
I've been hitting postpone, but the chatter that I'm hearing, it sounds very different.
Yeah, it really is. from
Then-
David Bond.
I
Which
haven't
is
read
too
the other
bad
Chakraborty
because-
yet. So
Well, then that's good because no comparison.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But
I have to
like-
see where I am on the
messaged
wait list.
my my old book club because
I like
that
the
was like we read
characters.
the David Bond trilogy together, and
Yeah.
like we all were obsessed with it. And I messaged them recently. I was like, "Hey guys, like just so you know, I'm hearing mixed things. Don't pick it up expecting another David Bond."
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I
we'll see
liked
what people think.
I am
Amina herself.
fourth
I
in the
liked getting the
queue.
crew back together. But I thought that like a lot of it hinged on her saying like in the past I was so badass and had a lot, like it was a lot more. You're not seeing those moments; you're being told about them, which is kind. And then it's not much magic. It's really just like the creatures from David Bond are the only like this magic you get. Everything else is historical fiction.
I've heard
And
that
it's like adventure instead of like any other kind of plot.
I heard them humor was different.
Humor was very different. Yeah,
Yeah.
Humor.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's so humor is tough in books.
that's very
Yeah,
subjective.
I just found it kind
Mhm.
of boring, to be honest. Like I was by the end, I was like, I have no investment in this.
Oh, that's so
I don't think
It's
sad.
not as long as the other books that she wrote, right? It's a little shorter, I think. Is
The
that
first City of
correct?
Brass isn't as long either, so they like get bigger.
Oh, okay.
It might be a little.
City of
shorter.
Brass, I want to read this year. I just haven't gotten to it yet because I've
That
kind
was
of got
what
hung up
we
on
were-
Temeraire.
Oh, and I love how you're like, oh, I'm on a book buying ban. Meanwhile, you earlier were talking about like, oh, I at this bookstore or this book sale.
I know. I broke the book
I
buying
could
ban on
only
Friday.
carry
I went to the
Sarah
book
got-
sale.
I was like, oh wow, that book ban.
We're calling out Sarah on live. They're being put on the spot.
Yeah, no, I did. I actually have to film a video because I broke my book buying ban. I mean, I got scribbed back while I was in the
You need
hospital
script.
Yeah,
4 weeks ago.
Totally fair.
And then so that was already, I broke the ban when I did that, but then I haven't bought any like physical books, but then the like charity book sale, the secondhand book sale,
Yeah.
I went with my dad and I bought
Charity.
4 or 5 books for me and I bought a bunch of books for my daughter. So I
Those ones,
did break the book buying ban. So I will be making a video. I did not make it to 50 books. I think I read 27 before I broke the
Understandable.
ban, but
Hey, but this is like this is a mindset, like of like the falling off the wagon. It's like,
Yeah,
so
the gym
now are you still? Is this like, hey, this was a slip up, but this is still my goal. I still want to work through the
Or you
books I
did.
have. You're like, well,
no,
the
I ate
video, and so now the diet is done. You know.
Yeah.
no, the video that I'm gonna make is actually I'm gonna talk about like lessons learned because I think when I went on the book buying ban, my idea was like, oh well, if I don't buy any more books, I'll read the physical books that I have, but that's not what happened. I just read
said
the
you
books I
stopped
wanted to
reading.
from the library instead. So because what I realized is
Yeah.
the books that are on my shelf, half of them I just actually don't have much interest in right now, and like
yeah,
that's
and how-
okay. Well, see, I heard someone describe your TBR shelf like a wine cellar, right? If you have a wine cellar, I'm not a wine drinker. I don't drink alcohol at all, but I thought this was a really good analogy. This idea of like people who have a wine cellar, like you have your wine there, the point of having a wine cellar isn't to drink all the wine. You keep adding wine to the wine cellar so you have the right wine for the right occasion, so that
Right
when you
occasion.
want to
Those are
have,
good. I
you
like
know,
that.
the book, you know, so that's how I'm trying to think about my TBR shelf, is like, these are books that I'm, you know, I am going to unhaul some of them. I have probably about 10 that I'm going to unhaul right away. And then I am still doing my self-destruct shelf. So if I don't read those by December, I'm going to unhaul them, because I picked books specifically for that I was like, I don't know that I'm ever going to want to read these. Like, my reading tastes have kind of shifted, but I have a whole bunch of books that like I know I'm going to want to read, but I just might not want to read them right now. Like, I have Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I'm not going to unhaul that. I know I want to read that.
Fair.
I'm just not ready to read it yet. So like, the occasion will arise and I will want to read that eventually. And I mean, my book collection it's definitely not the same as some other people who have hundreds and hundreds of books. Like, this is it. This is all of my books, like, that I own in my entire life. Like, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not, and like this bookshelf, like, it doesn't go all the way to the floor. Like, the bottom shelf is full of boxes with pictures in it, and even like this top shelf here is all books from like my husband's university degree, and then I've got some old sci-fi paperbacks that are my dad's, like, they don't even belong to me. So like, there's like, it's really not that big of a collection, and I have enough space for them, so I'm like not worried about my TBR. So I'm gonna make a video like talking through the book buying ban and like how I feel about things.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
I also just don't read physical books.
I was gonna say, you're like an ebook reader anyway.
This is the thing.
Exactly.
The physical books, like, you have to have I used to have a physical book reading life, and I just don't anymore. You know, it's like you have to have the time and the space to like actually sit down in a well-lit room to read, you know? Whereas otherwise, ebooks and audiobook has just like totally expanded the opportunities.
This is Maria's on this
reading.
journey with her audiobooks.
Yes, I'm very excited for this.
Yeah.
I'm excited too. I wanted to ask though, Kristen in the comments, doesn't work like that for you in terms of like, doesn't age like wine and you never come back to them? I'm assuming that's what you meant.
Yeah, like you just leave them there and you never drink the wine.
Just because I think that's what happens to me. Like, I just
I have some books like that. Sure.
That's how your wine gets to be super worth a lot of money, when it just sits there for a long time, and then, you know, it's vintage and nobody has that anymore.
And then you resell.
But I mean, I'm not against unhauling. Like, I think if there's a book that you legitimately are like, I'm never going to read this, like, get rid of it. That's fine. And then if you ever do change your mind, you can get it from the library. You can buy it again. Like, books don't disappear. It's very rare, especially for the kind of books that we're talking about. Like, even
books do disappear, Sarah. And I have like, the reason I have a physical TBR is because books disappear.
Because you want hardcovers.
Well, you live in the States, so that's different.
I think if you're chasing hardcovers.
Or special
I mean the content, the content of the books,
the actual story.
Yeah. The story itself, because you can find a pirated version of books that have been out of print for, you know, however many, you know, you can read a book from 100 years ago that no one would ever bother printing again, because you can find it on Project Gutenberg, right?
One series that I love that went out of print and isn't available on pirated or anything anymore.
Which one?
Anymore now.
What is it? Really I bet you I can find it for you.
Please do. Yeah. No, I own it, but like, I'm not scared, but like, I'm sad to recommend it to people because I don't think they can get it. It's the Lumitere Chronicles by Melina Marchetta.
I've never heard of that. Hang on,
so
I gotta write it down.
It's so good.
Really good. Like, it's out of print.
Lumitere?
Lumatee. Yeah, Lumatere. I'll put it in private chat.
I will look for an e-copy that I can read, because
let me know, because then I'll recommend it to people.
Yeah, because she got picked up by a traditional.
It's in my top favorite.
She got by a traditional publisher, so her self-pub stuff's pulled.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're like, for self-pub, that's a little bit different, because those don't often get pirated as much as like real like big books. So I guess it is true that things could disappear, but there are thousands of books published every year. So if you can't find that one book, like, it's not the end of your life forever more.
But in terms
of
like collecting and hardcovers, it is. It
Yeah,
is the
collecting
Bible.
books is different. I am not a book
Yeah, yeah.
collector. My books are not like I do not own them for the purpose of collecting certain editions or certain quality.
Mhm.
Like I own books so I can read them, and that's a totally different way of thinking about
So
things.
true.
So
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're two different hobbies. Book collecting and reading.
So true.
Yes.
two different hobbies.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I do way more collecting than I do actually reading, but you know.
What's the first book in the series
Kate will buy
called for that
a nice
Lumiere?
edition. She has no interest in reading. She's
First book is Troy of the Exiles or no, Finnegan of the Rock.
Okay, it's totally on Scribd as an audiobook.
Oh, cool.
It is.
Oh, nice.
Good to know.
Finnick of the Rock and The Piper's Son are on Scribd
Perfection.
by
And I will continue recommending away. I love that series.
as
You, all
audiobooks.
It's a great one.
you should read it in the comments.
And then
It's
I'm gonna
so
see if Amazon has it. Let's see.
That should be our next, not our next, but like one of our books.
Are
I'd
we
be on board.
are we
I've
over
read them
talking
a long
about
time. I mean, I think we
This
pretty
always
much
happens to us. This
Yeah,
always
we always veer into other chat.
We've rambled into other things.
Yeah.
We didn't announce the next book.
DNF.
Oh shoot.
Oh no.
Breaking my heart here.
And you can find lots of used copies of Finnegan of the Rock on Amazon. There's currently 26 on Amazon.ca.
Ooh, nice.
So it hasn't
So you
disappeared,
recommend
I
it.
The
promise.
rest of it too? Because I know sometimes like the last books aren't.
Let's see. Ah, I don't know what I just clicked. Am I
I mean, I'll
Stupid
Google
computer.
after. I guess I
Yeah.
didn't check that detailed.
Book 1 of 3 of the Lumiere Chronicle. Is this YA or is this
Technically, I'd call it kind of
Uh,
crossover. I think first book is definitely YA, and then second and third book are crossover enough.
so
I do think,
there
like,
are
first book
21
We get, and then it gets really,
used
really
of the third book. So there are still lots of the third book available. So
That's cool.
anyway,
Mm.
sidetracked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
we
feel
want to
like
talk
the
about the next
strongest
book?
feelings
Yeah.
we had about this book that we just read was like the discrepancies in the
Yeah, that's
the
weird.
versions.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those books that like I read it and am I going to ever talk about it on my channel again?
No, me
Probably
neither.
not. It'll go in a wrap up
Is-
and then I will forget that I read it 5 years from now.
If it
I'll be
is,
like, oh
like-
yeah, remember
It was
that?
an
It is
okay
a book,
audio.
it's hard to recommend.
Like the audio narrator had a nice voice.
Yeah, I like the narrator too.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd only recommend the longer version, but it's
Yeah.
also
Yes.
more to commit
Yeah.
to, so
sounds like
it's
it.
a little bit hard.
There's a part of me that wished I read the longer version, but I was not able to get it at the time when we were originally going to do this live. So I had the shorter version from my library. And then by the time that we moved the live and everything, then I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to read the short one because I've been a bit of a reading slump lately. So
Kate, if you tell me that the second or like the sequels are really good, I'll reread with the long one and then continue
Yeah,
on.
I'll definitely
did-
let you guys
I
know.
feel like I would have liked it even more if I'd done the long.
Yeah, I do.
and if
think
anybody
it's the long one for
Mhm.
sure.
if anybody wants to continue on with the series, we will create a thread in the Discord where you can chat about continuations. We do have, if you have been with us for a while and read some of the other books, we do have a thread for talking about the Sun Chronicles as well as I can never remember the name of the series, the Rebecca Roanhorse series.
Oh, that Black Sun one.
No, Rebecca.
Between Earth and Sky.
Yeah, I forgot.
That might
right?
be it. Yeah.
Remember.
And then there is also the Wayfarer Becky Chambers. Hey, did we read from 2 authors that had similar names, Rebecca and Becky? That's funny.
And we had 2 books that had sun in them, so we're just like
Yeah.
That's actually a good segue to talk about our next book, maybe.
which is completely different title and name.
Am I
It's gonna be
announcing
on
it?
yeah.
It's your
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That was your cue, Kristen.
it's like
Stage.
it's an awkward silence. So what month would that be? June?
Mhm.
So in
Yeah.
the month of June, we are going to be reading
Discussing.
Redemption. Oh, sorry. We're
Discussing.
reading and
We
discussing.
read in May and discuss
We
in
read in
June.
May because we're late.
Oh,
with this
right.
one.
Oh, yeah.
late.
We're late. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is why. That's why I paused to clarify. Nobody.
Clear.
In the month of May, we will be reading Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lord. It is a retelling based on a Senegalese fable. So I am pretty excited about it. I think it will I don't know. I'm very excited. Karen Lord is one of my tryout new authors. So looking forward to checking that out. And I think it'll be cool to get like retellings from other cultures. I think that's always really exciting.
Yeah. Agreed.
And it's a first standalone.
It is fantasy though. It's like a fantasy, or is it?
I think it's a fantasy retelling, so there'll be some familiar elements, I'm sure. I think there is a copy, at least I'm pretty sure there was a ebook copy on my script, but that varies depending on
mine as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
The audiobook's on there too.
Perfect.
Not on
And
mine.
Kate
I
said
didn't have
apparently-
the audiobook, which makes me sad.
Kate said that apparently the audiobook's supposed to be good.
You said the
it's
audiobook
Robin
was good.
Miles is the narrator who's done a ton of other audiobooks, but I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, it's short. 100 and something pages, I think.
Oh,
That might
perfect.
make it even easier.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll probably
You're
I might read it
welcome.
twice. I might read it twice.
Okay, cool.
Well, if we like it, we could read the other one by Karen Lord. The what is it? Between
Best of all
Worlds?
possible
No,
worlds.
Best of All Possible Worlds as well. We could do a twofer.
Why not?
There we go.
That one's sci-fi. I'm probably, if I like in Redemption in Indigo, I'm very excited to read the Best of All Possible Worlds.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
Yeah, I want to check them both out at some point.
Wait, Best of All Possible Worlds, is that the hold on, is that the one that everyone
it's
keeps saying?
it's
like sci-fi
the one
thriller?
that it's about a
No,
main character who is able to travel to multiple parallel worlds because only people
No, I was
who
thinking a
are
different one.
dead in those other parallel
That's
worlds
the
can travel
space
to those
between
worlds.
That's
That's
the
what
space
I was
Oh, I
between
got them
worlds.
mixed
What I
up.
have
That's
on mine
different.
is- Yeah.
No,
That's the
that's
same-
different.
that's the
That's
same
So what's
author?
the best of all possible? So what
Okay,
is the
okay.
best of all possible worlds?
I don't actually
Maybe I'm
remember.
getting them mixed up too.
I feel like the best of all possible worlds is like an interacting cultures.
Alien society
Okay.
finds its homeland destroyed in an unprovoked act of aggression, and the survivors have no choice but to reach out to the indigenous humanoids of their adopted world to whom they're distantly related. So it is kind of
It's like a
sci-fi.
merging of two
Yeah.
cultures.
So
Men and women
Yeah.
from two clashing societies must work together to save this vanishing race and end up uncovering ancient mysteries with far-reaching ramifications.
So I definitely thought it was the other one.
That's what I thought you were saying.
So
and
I
like,
was
there's
under the
two
wrong.
Mind blown.
Okay,
But it is
But if
still
you read-
sci-fi. So
yeah, the space between
Yeah.
worlds is also good, and you should check that out. Just
Yeah.
don't go into it expecting thriller. People
Okay.
mistakenly talked a lot about it as a thriller, and it
That's
is
what I thought.
not thrilling.
so you've read
Very
the Space Between
interesting.
Worlds,
I have, yeah,
but
It's
not
good.
the Best of All Possible Worlds.
but not the best of all possible worlds by
Okay.
Kristen and I were
by
talking
Karen
By
Lord.
Karen Lord.
Yeah.
Space
I'd put
Between
that on one of my
Worlds
lists.
is by
Mine too.
Micaiah Johnson. I'm not sure how to say her,
Yeah.
her name.
Yeah.
I own that one, but I'm scared to read it because I don't like parallel dimension stories or time
I
travel.
thought it
so-
I
brought up
love
some
that.
really cool. I struggled with the pacing a little bit, and I kept being like, "When is it gonna get thrilling?" You know, like, and it didn't quite. Like I kept being like, and then nothing would happen. But the parallel universe thing I thought actually was very cool, and that's something that I'm
Okay.
not as into, more because it was like very character study in the way that it approached it.
Interesting.
Okay. That has
Is
me
it a sci-fi you
more
think I'd like?
excited.
Yeah, it's not like
Mhm.
too sci-fi.
Space opera,
It's more
yeah.
like character. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
The ending is a little bit quick, but
Fair.
other than that,
Our tangents.
I know.
We just accept it.
An hour
Everyone's
later.
excited to read Redemption and Indigo with us. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, Redemption in Indigo is the book.
Redemption
Not any of
in
the other
Indigo.
things we mentioned.
You all. Yeah.
in May,
Yes.
To be
That's
discussed.
in June.
in
June.
June.
Yes. That's
Yes.
true.
Okay.
Perfect.
Anything else we want to add or call it
I
there?
think we're good. I think we're
We're
good.
good.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Night.